Here we go, guys, valve train video. I've got a lot of parts out on the bench. Down here are the 10X prototype parts from the X231 engine, and up here are the 10A production parts from the 445 tractor. I've also got the 10A parts placed atop these cylinder heads to illustrate where all these components would be on a fully assembled engine and give a little better idea of the area that we're talking here. This is going to be another video where I do a lot of comparisons between the 10X prototype parts and the 10A production ones. A lot of similarities in their construction, but also a lot of design differences, some upgrades, and some streamlining that was done to these production pieces, much like we found on the engine block. After I get into that and break it all down, we'll move on to reconditioning X231's rocker arms, as well as fixing a couple other pieces here that are in pretty tough shape. So let's get into it and get it done. So we'll start out by looking at what I call the rocker carrier. It's basically just a cast iron adapter plate that joins the two cylinder heads together by bolting to the top of them and provides an offset mounting base for the valve cover, slightly offset from the center line of the tractor. We can check out the casting numbers real quick. This is the 10X part from X231. You can see the number 10X4625, and the 10A one here from the production 445 tractor. You can see a 10A7255. And you look at the construction between these two, they're rather similar, but it's apparent that the 10X plate is much thicker. It's a lot heavier than the 10A one. Looking at the side profile, it's a lot thicker in this area where the 10A one is quite a bit thinner. And also, where it mounts to the cylinder heads is a lot wider on the 10X one than we have on the 10A back here. Same for these crossbars. They are quite wide on the 10X, and they're actually narrowed down quite a bit on the 10A production version. And just to further illustrate the difference between the 10A rocker carrier and the 10X one, we'll put it on my old scale here. And the 10A one has a little bit of weight to it, surprisingly heavy for what it is and what it actually does. It comes in right at about 12.5 pounds, so that's still a lot of cast iron for the purpose that it serves. But when you pick up the 10X piece, you can tell that it is considerably heavier. A lot more material in it. So we'll put that on the scale. See what we get. Looks about 17 3/4 pounds. Just about 18 pounds of cast iron just in this one piece right here. So that is indeed a considerable difference. Another three areas where these two pieces differ from one another are as follows. Now they're positioned on the bench so that the front of the tractor would be in that direction. So this is the rear of the engine right here. We'll look at the 10A production 445 piece, and it has this cast ear that comes off the back corner of the carrier housing with a through hole. That's actually one of the attachment points for the fuel tank on a production 445 tractor. X231 also had a fuel tank right behind the engine, but it had its own separate mounting brackets, so that ear never was added on the 10X piece. The second area where they differ is with this bump out right here in the 10A piece. It also has a through hole. That's where the ignition coil mounts up high on the side of the engine. Interesting part about X231's carrier is that they added this little square block to the side of the cast housing after it was made, and that's also where X231 had its ignition coil mounted. So they definitely thought that was a good spot. You can see they just drilled and tapped the cast iron housing with a couple of 1/4 inch by 20 machine screws to anchor this little steel block that they just drilled a hole through. So that must have been one of the ideas that they liked about the prototype version, because they ended up making it permanent on the production piece. And the third major difference between these two pieces has to do with the front of X231's rocker carrier. You can see these two plugs in place. They seal a passage that comes in from the front, makes a 90-degree turn, and comes straight out the top. When we took X231 apart, these plugs were already in place, so either this passage was never utilized, or it did at one time serve as a oil passage or breather passage and was just done away with and plugged off. And just to compare it to the 10A production piece, there is not even a provision in this piece for any of that. So the final rather interesting comparison I want to make between the 10X prototype rocker carrier and the production 10A is how close the footprint of the 10X production piece matches the factory-made, factory-cut-out gaskets that are still sold in the engine gasket sets to this day. You can see how when I place the prototype rocker carrier on the gasket follows every one of these inside contours these bump outs that are on the prototype piece but are not found on the 10A production piece. Just to show, when I place the 10A piece on the factory gasket, you have these tabs that stick out and are essentially not used. Now, every 445 engine that I've been into so far has had these tabs of these gaskets sticking out from underneath the carrier. So it's almost like, even though the initial design of the prototype rocker carrier changed, they just went with the same original spec on the gasket. So moving on to the rocker arms, X231's components really only differ from the production 445 setup in three minor ways. The first of which is this oil feed line. It comes up and simply enters into the top of the rocker shaft, whereas the production 445 setup has a couple of extra bends and feeds in at the bottom. The second minor difference is these springs that separate the rocker arms on the production 445 unit. X231 has much simpler steel sleeves that accomplish that same task. I think I like the springs better because as these components wear against one another, the clearances side to side will just keep getting greater and greater, whereas the springs can accommodate for certain amounts of wear and still keep pieces tight. The third and final minor difference between these two setups is that X231 uses these C-clips in shallow grooves on each end of the rocker shaft to retain the rocker arms to the shaft, and the 445 production setup just uses cotter pins. So moving on now to the work that needs to be done to X231's rocker components to get them back up to spec. First order of business is going to be reconditioning the ends of the rocker arms where they contact the valve stems. Pretty common on engines of this vintage to see a wear pattern like this. I've got the equipment and tools necessary to fully recondition these over on the other bench. Let's take all these components over there and get that part of it done. This is my old Sioux valve grinding machine. I have a rocker arm attachment for it that centers the rocker arm between these two cones, and it also has a spring that keeps steady pressure on the rocker arm as it's brought against the face of the grinding stone. It can be rotated like this, which reconditions the end face of the rocker arm and gets rid of all these old wear marks and leaves you with a nice, smooth, renewed surface ready for a new valve. Another one done. Every so often I'll take the rocker arm fixture off and I'll put the dressing tool on and I'll dress the face of the stone. That just keeps everything true, keeps everything working like it should, and it also helps to keep the stone from wearing too bad. So just got to finish the rest of them. We'll have this done. So the rocker arms are done. The last thing I need to look at is these two rocker shaft pedestals down here. You might have noticed that I've kept the studs in these the whole time. That's because both of these are broken. When we took X231 apart, we actually found these pieces of metal on top of this rocker pedestal and this one over here, pretty much keeping these broken pieces retained and keeping everything together. It looks like a kind of a down on the farm cheap fix that someone did at one time. Of course, that piece is broken out as well. They even had what looks like a former external line clip over the top of this lighter tin piece that they had bent kind of to help reinforce everything. It's even got some prairie gold paint on it yet. So at one time this was on the outside of the tractor, but I guess they figured they needed it inside more to help hold their rocker arms together. So here's where I'm at with these two pieces. It's kind of unfortunate that they're broken. They are 10X pieces. This is a 10X5609. I can tell you that I'm not going to go to the lengths of having these remade. They're just not worth recasting and remachining for me. I think I can repair them. I'm not sure about that, but I'm really thinking about giving it a shot. Another option that is on the table is replacing these broken 10X ones with the production 10A pedestals. Fortunately, they are identical. All the dimensions are the same, to the point where two of these production 10A ones could be substituted for these broken 10X ones, and even being used in conjunction with the two good 10X pedestals everything would work just fine. So they are clones of one another, so that is one good option that's on the table. So like I said, I think I'm going to try and repair these. I'm not sure I can, but I guess they're broken already, so in the worst case scenario I can just break them worse. So even if I ended up not using these two 10X pedestals, I would keep them with the tractor, so that if sometime down the line someone else has this and they're working on it, they want to go and try and reproduce these, they can have at it. More power to them. So I'm going to do some research. I'll make some decisions. I'll try and decide what the best approach might be for trying to get these put back together, and when I have something to report, I'll get the camera back out and we'll update from there. Well, I did end up repairing the two broken pedestals. At this point it looks like the attempt was a success. Only time will tell. I don't know if they're going to be strong enough to withstand clamping them down around that rocker shaft, but we'll find that out when we do the installation on those pieces. I checked around a little bit, did some research trying to determine possibly what the best avenue of approach would be to repair these cast iron pieces. I looked into cast welding. I also looked into brazing a little bit. The deciding factor was when I consulted one of my Canadian buddies. He is Mog5858 here on YouTube. Pretty darn good welder he is, so he recommended that I try the brazing route for the added strength and the resistance to cracking over cast welding. So that's what I did. Followed his instructions to the letter, and I got everything V'd out real well. I made a fixture to clamp the broken piece with the parent piece together and maintain the gap where it's cut out right here. Held everything firmly in position, and I got everything brazed, cleaned it all up, reshaped, reformed everything, and I think they came out pretty good. I'll see what happens when I go to tighten them in, but at this point I think they're definitely worth giving it a try. So that does it for the rocker arms. These pieces are all fully reconditioned and ready to go back on the engine for when that time comes. We are starting to slowly get parts back from the machine shop. I have these cylinders here bored out 20 thousandths oversized for the new pistons. I can begin the final cleanup on these, make sure the water jackets are free from rust, get the expansion plugs put back in. I can also check the piston rings in the cylinders, make sure the ring gap is up to spec, and then get those rings put back on the new pistons. We also got the rods back. They reconditioned the bearing ends, re-rounded everything, honed them out back to spec, so everything is true and good there. And they put the new wrist pin bushings in them as well, and custom sized the bushings to fit the new wrist pins. So everything here has been turning out really well so far. I will put a link to Mog5858's channel down in the description below, guys. Go over there, check it out. He's got a lot of cool stuff. Like, subscribe, do all that whole thing. And same here, guys. If you want to leave any comments, any observations you have, anything you like, don't like, let me know. It's all good. So I appreciate it all. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back here next time.